Welcome once again to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, bringing to you thought leaders, insights, and awareness on how to navigate through the mindset of somebody in conflict. That means yours as well as mine. Takes two to tango. And so with that, we're going to continue on a journey into looking at a different aspect that's so relevant to today's turbulent world. Starting back, founded in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, was the emergence of community mediation, how to bring skilled facilitators into the communities to resolve those conflicts that erupted on so many levels. Well, we've had our ups and downs. In fact, I first had my start in community mediation way back in the early 90s. And what I was so interested to learn, our guest speaker today, D.G Mawn, is somebody who's really dedicated his professional life to leading legally and mediating in community mediation. He is currently the president of the National Association for Community Mediation. He's also been very active in the Association for Conflict Resolution, where I believe I may first have heard about him way back in the mid-2000s. He's also very active in JAM's Foundation Grants Coordinator, as well as a Trust Networker co-convener, and very active in Indiana's Division of Mental Health and Addictions. And he doesn't stop there. He's a professor at the Carter School of George Mason University. So he comes today with a rich wealth of education, background, and experience. And one of the things that I was so excited to talk to him about today that you'll learn more of as we launch into our episode for today is how conflict revolution, I like to add conflict evolution, can be the change that will feed us, move us forward, get through difficult times, difficult situations, and sometimes difficult people. And so he tells us about the distinction between community mediation and mediation in general. And again, back to the 64 Civil Rights Act, so it's been around for a while. But he doesn't stop there. I will let you know that when he's not mediating or jogging marathons, he enjoys sitting out on his porch, being with his family and friends, enjoying what nature has to bring us. So stay tuned, don't go away. You will want to hear how community mediation is being used in today's world, trying to resolve some of these conflicts that we see in our neighborhoods at the lowest level. We need to make a difference. We need to choose a different route. And DG helps outline a pathway for getting there. So the countdown is going to start any moment, and we will get going, and don't go away. Pass it on. Still time to let your friends know about what's coming up next with D.G Mawn. Do listen, take notes. There's a lot to learn. We're getting started soon. Here we go. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc. You know, one of the things I'm so passionate about is bringing incredible thought leaders to people just like you to learn more about how to navigate through conflict, that conflict isn't always bad. Sometimes great things can come out of addressing conflict and really improving relationships at many, many levels. And so today I am so excited to have with us D.G Mawn. Welcome, D.G.
Thank you for having me, Dr. D. Thrilled to be here.
Well, great. You know, and I'm really excited to delve deeper into your particular area of specialty because I started off in community mediation more years than I want to publicly disclose in the recording. So I'm excited to hear more about how the field has evolved and where it can go. And before we get launched, though, DG, I'd like to just share a little bit with our viewers and listeners about why you. What do you bring to the table? Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, DG is actually an attorney, a mediator, a professor, and is the current president for the National Association for Community Mediation. He's also very active in many other venues, but that's the key one that we want to focus on right now. But I think you can tell that DG comes to us with an enormous amount of background, legally, community-wise, professionally, in so many ways. And so I'm excited to have you here, DG.
I'm excited to be here.
Great, great. You know, one of the things that I find appeals to people so much is hearing a little bit about their story. You know, what got you into law? What was a shift to mediation? And now your focal point on community mediation, what it has to offer. So tell us a little bit.
I think what got me into law is I was uncomfortable that there was this whole language and process that went on that those involved in the conflict really seemed to have very little say over. And so I decided to go to law school so I could learn that language so that I could better appreciate what was going on. In that process, I ended up working for a little while for Mayor Washington in Chicago and did not know then that I know now that what he was asking me to do was to mediate and to go out into the community, hear what their issues were with the city, hear how they would like those issues to be resolved, and then communicate back to him if he was comfortable with the resolution the community had come up with. He agreed to every single resolution the community came up with. It was a great way to demonstrate to residents in Chicago how you want to address this conflict is how it will be addressed. How you would like it resolved is how it will be resolved. And so that brought me into infuse my whole legal practice. From that point on, I was a legal service attorney for a while. Then I worked for the state looking at rights for young children, and then eventually decided to become certified in mediation. After that progress and moving forward, I realized that my way of doing mediation was very aligned with how community mediators do mediation, that those in the conflict should be the primary voice for how it's going to be addressed, how they're going to lean into it. Those in the conflict should facilitate the choices they're making, not be told, here's your options, pick one. Those in the conflict really should experience, I am creating how this is going to impact my life. Is it going to be something momentary? Is it going to be something permanent? How am I going to permit this to impact me? And what I found in that space is those in the conflict ended up becoming much more transparent with each other, much more real about what was driving the conflict. It had nothing to do with the shoes. It had to do with, you never talked to me when we're in the supermarket. Okay, then let's talk about that. And what it ended up occurring from that is sustainable resolution of that particular conflict first. And then secondly, and to me more importantly, taught those in conflict how to sit in conflict. Because quite frankly, we have conflict every day. And we should embrace it. Conflict is a good thing. Conflict can help us grow and change and mature and evolve. So we need to remove the fear of it. And I think the fear of conflict is because we don't know how to sit with it. We don't know how to embrace it. So in that process, you not only help resolve the short-term issue that came before you help them learn how they're going to address conflict in the future so they don't have to come back.
Yeah. Well, you said so many things there. I was just trying to say, okay, how do I want to respond to some of what you had to say? Because it's so true that people really don't know how to sit in conflict. Most people look at conflict as something to be avoided, and don't go there. And yet one of the messages I try to put out there is out of adversity comes the opportunity for change. If you never reach out to have the conversation, you'll never reach resolution. From moments of pain comes the momentum for gain. So those are my three little quotes real quick. So
I agree with every single one of them. I think part of the concern is we're taught don't fight. Yeah. Fighting is bad. And yes, fisticuffs can be bad. However, expressing your opinion and having someone express the opposite is good, is a good thing. And I think we need that communication framework where people are able to be in their truth and then figure out where is the value that we're talking about, where is that area that we can agree on, and let's start our conversation there as opposed to the dispute or disagreement that brought us into this circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've already said it, so I want to build on it. One of the things I try to do, both as a mediator as well as a conflict coach, is to help people learn how to communicate, to have conversations, not confrontations.
And I want to, if I can, with conversation, because when I work with communities, conversation means I'm going to strive to hear your truth. With the con, C-O-N, and the bear, B-E-R, that's what we're saying. And so we can't have that conversation if we're not first willing to communicate, because communicate is feeding each other. And when we're fed, then we're calmer. We're able to hear each other, right? And then we're able to say, okay, I'm willing to take the time to see your truth. And by seeing each other's truth, you can find where is that space we're sharing and go forward. So I'm absolutely correct. It's about having conversation, not confrontation. And you can do that by first communicating, feeding each other, being transparent. And that's what we try to facilitate when we have our mediations.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I can see we're going to be feeding off of one another here because, it's rather than being reactive, which is where I see so many people go, they're reactive to what each other says, but then stop there. They either get into a fight or they walk away. And so there's no resolution. Instead, we want to think about how do we proactively manage this situation, not just react to the situation. Because it's usually in the reaction that we tend to say things and do things that are hurtful, harmful, and damaging that you can't take back. And so, again, it's to pause, take a deep breath, reflect. Okay, how can I do this differently to have a conversation rather than have this blow up into a reaction and therefore a confrontation.
You're absolutely correct. We're taught that our responses are to fight or to flee or freeze. And I think there's a fourth response, which is to free yourself to experience what's going on.
Okay.
And that, what you said, the breathing and that freeing, take that breath, allow yourself to bathe in what's happening, and then say, how can I lean into that? What can I do? Because we do have that fourth option. It doesn't have to be fight. It doesn't have to be freeze. It doesn't have to be flee. It can be free. Yeah. To choose to be free with each other allows us that freedom, if you will, to co-create what we want to do next, because we're not hampered in by particular restrictions. And having the ability to set that frame, for me, is really a point of view of how you approach conflict and those in conflict. And so much of what occurs is very much influenced by the attitude of the people who appear to have the authority who come into the conflict. And if you come in saying, I want a space where you are free to express what's going on, figure out what you want to do with it, you are going to have a much more sustainable, productive community than if you go in saying, stop what you're doing, don't talk, go to opposite walls. That doesn't accomplish the long-term goal of having a connection in the community, right? That long-term goal of feeling that the community cares about me and I care about the community.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, because inclusion is something we all crave and desire and need, rather than exclusion. And too often a lot of community behavior can be at an exclusion standpoint. And so your comments there lead me to really want to ask you this next question. We talked earlier before we started the interview as far as, we both have been around mediation for many years, and it still baffles me that there's such a lack of awareness about what mediation is, how mediation can be used, and the peace and health and happiness it can bring to lives when used appropriately. Because conflict in and of itself is not the bad thing. It's how you manage it. And so mediation is a tool for managing it effectively when you may not be able to manage things well on your own. But then you take it to community mediation. So I would like to hear from you, maybe your thoughts and perspectives about mediation, but then also what's the difference with community mediation?
I think mediation as a concept is an amazing thing to bring people together, to find that middle ground, that sharing. What can occur and has occurred at times is those who are bringing together also want to then suggest what the solution should be. Those bringing together also want to have a level of influence on how the process goes. What mediation at its best is holding that space so those in the conflict can make the decisions on how it goes, what we're going to talk about today, how we're going to walk through it, what does that mean, and to have that messiness of embracing the conflict. That sometimes people aren't ready to manage the conflict. What they need to do first is to embrace it, realize it's there, and then say, how does it affect me? How does it affect you? And then begin to say, okay, how do we want to manage that together, or what we call co-creating? What community mediation adds to it is that we walk in from a place of curiosity. We walk in from a place of quality and integrity in the group. And what we do is we, as community mediators, are not necessarily neutral in the sense of we do modulate for power dynamics. We do want to make sure one of the things I do is have people define what does respect mean. So I know what it means for them, because sometimes yelling at each other is perfectly fine for groups. For me, not so fine. But if everyone says that's okay, then I'm going to let it roll, because that's how they express themselves with each other. So really go through what is respect, what are we here for, and what are we trying to accomplish? And then what needs to be most freeing is the result. We must be impartial to the result, that the people need to have the ability to say, this is what I'm ready to do. This is what I'm ready to talk about. This is what I'm ready to address at this point. So we actually call it conflict. Community mediation is not conflict resolution, it's conflict revolution. And it's what we just talked about earlier, Dr. D. It's revolutionizing. One, you shouldn't be afraid of conflict, embrace it. Two, everyone in the circle, including yourself, has an equal voice. Use your voice, share your voice, hear the voice of others, respect each other. Revolutionizing conflict allows you to step back and say, okay, what is this telling me? What can we do with this? What can we move forward with this? Can we leave it here, or do we need to take it with us? So it really is about revolutionizing the concept that conflict is really a good thing, that conflict is necessary for growth, production, and that what we need people to learn is how to embrace it in a way that it's healthy, not unhealthy for those in the conflict.
Beautifully said. I love how that is because, again, well, we certainly could benefit from a lot of revolutionizing our communities, right? It's been a tough couple of years. And curious, as I know one of the things that you shared with me in getting ready for our interview today was, community mediation really has its sort of foundation in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so elaborate on that.
Absolutely. The modern iteration of the people I have the honor to represent as the president of NAFCOM comes from the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 10, where people know the federal part, the federal government that can come out and address these issues. What is forgotten and was co-equal was the community part. And specifically, it says anytime there is a dispute, disagreement, or disturbance, the people in that community need to lean into it, learn about it, and then create how they want to move forward with it. And so the members I have the honor to represent come from that place and bring it forward. And when I look at what was going on in the middle and early 1960s and what's going on today, I think there's more a need for community mediation than ever before. The advantage we had in the 60s is that the federal government and state governments were willing to invest in facilitating the development of what was called neighborhood boards, community boards, dispute boards, so that they could invest in that community ownership of their issues that we don't have today. Today, our centers need to rely on the generosity of private providers more times than not to keep themselves going and moving forward.
Wow. That is really interesting because I have to admit to being well trained and steeped in workplace practices related to the 7 protected classes under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Today, particularly focus on the disability aspects of Title VII. I didn't realize the focus on community mediation. So thank you, as I've just learned something new.
I can add to it. The one thing that's really important about that act is they don't use the word mediation; they use to mediate.
Okay.
And the federal government knew since the late 1800s what mediation is because they had mediation boards. They clearly could have said this must be mediation as we know it. What they chose to say was to mediate, which gives the community the freedom to say restorative circles is the best way for us to address this. Facilitated dialogues, world cafes, coaching, some of the stuff you do, Dr. D, those all fit under community mediation because we come from the act that used the verb to mediate to find that balance, not the nominalization for the practice of mediation. And I think that's a really good point that gets lost on folks, that if the federal government wanted us to only do mediation, it would have said that word in there, and it doesn't.
It doesn't. There's a couple things that come up with what you just said, DG, is that, the nuances of words, okay? And so just that simple thing, to mediate versus mediation. I try to bring a lot of emphasis to the words we use because it influences the messages being sent and then also how we show up with one another. For example, opinion versus perspective. Opinion sounds much more rigid and fixed, whereas perspective this is simply how I see it from my experiences, my vantage point, whatever that is. The second point I wanted to say in response to what you just said is that one of the things when I used to teach at law school as a professor, the continuum of dispute resolution strategies. And that, and here in the U.S., we have long, litigation is the best known. But then as mediation and other dispute resolution forms came along, it became known as alternative dispute resolution. And the reality is that litigation is just one form of dispute resolution when we have a whole array of options available. And some of the things that you listed under community mediation, like restorative circles or restorative processes or facilitated dialogue, and sometimes just conflict coaching, one-on-one conflict coaching. And I always like to share this, because I don't know if you know this from your Association for Conflict Resolution days. I know you're still part of that, but in the first decade of this century, I was very active with ACR, And I just love, because we would have a lot of people come from Canada and Australia particularly. And I loved it, even way back in like 2005, 6 or 7, I can't remember what the year was, but Australia had already determined legislatively that mediation was the primary dispute resolution and litigation was the alternate dispute resolution process. And so they call it PDR. And we're not there yet in the US, even though it's been, more than 15 years. But I oftentimes refer to dispute resolution as opposed to mediation, because mediation is simply one form of dispute resolution, just like litigation, et cetera, what we already talked about. So, yeah.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah. It would be wonderful if we would embrace that as well. If we are able to say the ability of people to engage in conflict and address it is the center of dispute resolution, not only are we teaching people how to interact with each other, at work, at school, at home, at the bus stop, in the park. Think about how fewer calls to policing, how fewer cases in the courtroom, because so many of those things come out of people losing temper, people losing patience, people not knowing how to express themselves, not knowing how to be heard. So an extreme occurs. It would be amazing if we could do that.
Yeah. What a transformative process, right? It would transform our country, could transform the world. Yeah. And I was, jokingly drawing upon the old television commercial is that we've come a long way, baby, but we have a long way yet to go.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Yes, we do.
I'm curious, when we talk about community mediation as a viewpoint, a way to approach conflict, elaborate more about how that's being done today. What's happening?
Absolutely. It is being done in over 350 locations here in the United States and Canada, and probably more. So I'll just say 350 I'm aware of plus. And it's twofold. It is done at centers, at places where those who are providing the service are from the community that's in the conflict. And that is so key to make sure the board or the staff or the volunteers are all aware of and part of the fabric of the very community that's in conflict, because they're the individuals who get how best to communicate. You said words matter, and they do. If you're in the community, you know what a word means that in another community may have a very different meaning. And so it's really important to do that. All the centers work as closely as is invited with the judicial system, with the school systems, to make sure they're assisting to offer mediation or facilitation or sort of circle the whole array of dispute practices so that you don't have as many people ending up with a criminal record, which is only going to advantage all of us. They're also in the community helping before there even is a court case. So working with neighborhood associations, working with groups that have really wonderful, amazing groups that are having intra-party arguments and don't know how to get through it. They're working with them as well. And all the centers are called to initiate, facilitate, and educate the community anytime there is the possibility for positive systemic change. And so many of the things that we've been able to resource through the James Foundation have looked at issues around veterans and veterans' rights and discrimination that goes on with veterans, older adult discrimination, marginalization of young adults. We have looked at immigration and how to better make those connections in our community. We have looked at LGBTQ. We have looked at health disparities. We have looked at law enforcement. We this year are launching a new one looking at how do we reimagine community safety. And our centers are in the middle of those processes because all of those things, way beyond where you would think we would be, are essential to respond to the 1964 Civil Rights Act that said anywhere there's a dispute, anywhere there's a disagreement, anywhere there's a disturbance, we must be there, reaching out to create space that creates the possibility for healing, for real healing among people, among their institutions, so that we can continue to co-create and move forward in a way that is more peace-filled, in a way that's more just, in a way that is more connected amongst and with each other, where we're not fearful of those who are different, but instead are inspired by them to think about, why do I make the choice I make? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So all of us can continue to evolve to be two things. One, the best and most amazing individuals we're destined to be. And two, the best and most amazing part of this fabric that we call community. And so when I look at the people, the centers across North America that I have the honor to represent in my particular role, I feel blessed every single day that I am able to help through amazing people like yourself, Dr. D, to open people's eyes, opens people's blinds in their windows and say, wow, there is another way. There's a better way to really be together.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, there are a couple of things that you've said that I'd like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more, because, we talked about mediation, we've talked about community mediation. I know earlier you mentioned the word being curious to go there, to have that conversation. As I like to say, it takes courage, one, to be curious, to reach out and to initiate a conversation, not a confrontation. And then it also takes curiosity to build that courage. I want to move on from what we just experienced. I want to forge a better relationship. I want to be part of this community. I don't want to be isolated from this community because of what's happened. And so I put that out to our listeners and viewers as far as, it takes courage and curiosity and compassion. What's happening for the other person? How are they being impacted in ways that I may not know? And what's important for how we move forward, and then forging an agreement on how to move forward. Not staying stuck in the past. I just heard a conversation this morning, actually, where family members, have sort of attacked another family member because they sat by somebody who they didn't like at the person's funeral. And the one family member just didn't want the other person to be alone, at her own spouse's funeral. And yet, it just created a whole turbulence among the family dynamics. And so if you take that out into the community, then again, the turbulence that it creates is really pretty destructive rather than constructive. In forging that community spirit, that sense of inclusion and so forth. I think it was prior to our start of the interview process, but I do want you to elaborate on this because it's one thing for people to understand mediation as a whole, community mediation as a particular focal point, but then you mentioned the word restorative circles, and I don't know that a lot of people know and understand that, but particularly in the use with the juvenile community and so forth, and how that can really make a powerful difference.
Absolutely. And I do want to add another word that you have to be to really embrace this, and that's the one is to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And that's something the judicial system doesn't let people be. And when you're vulnerable, you're actually able to expose the wound. And until you do, you can't heal it.
Yeah.
And again, healed people, healthy people, are more willing to co-create and be than hurt people. Hurt people are more willing to hurt others. And so unless we do that healing, it can't happen. And that also takes us to why so many of our centers, it's over 63% at this point, use some type of restorative practice or principle in the process. As you know, the practices we use come from the indigenous peoples that were here for thousands of years before others decided this would be a nice place to live as well.
Yeah.
So what we have adopted from the indigenous principles of restorative circles is that everyone enters into that from their choice to hear the others. And that's why there's the importance of the talking stick. And that's why it's important that we talk one at a time. And we go in that process because your first impulse, as you said earlier, that you may want to say, really probably isn't something you should say or need to say. And so by the time the talking stick circles to you, you're really much more in your truth. Yes, you've calmed down, you're focused, you're in that process together. And so we honor it when I do it. I always have the stick pass over the heart to the left, because I always want to invite the person next to me to know that my heart is open to what they need to say. And I'm asking them to open their heart as well. And so when we get out of the head, the thinking, and move into the desire, the want, what is really needed, that's when you really are able to get to, okay, that's what we can talk about. Yeah. In the story you shared about the woman sitting, she wants someone to be alone and the family was upset, the conversation with a circle could lead to, they're so upset you sat with her, but totally support and get why you wouldn't want someone to sit alone, because no one wants to be sitting alone. And once you're able to get to that truth, you're able to move forward. You're still able to say, I wish you had sat next to her for whatever reason, but I get why you did. And I respect that because no one wants someone to be sitting alone, especially at a funeral. So I just think that these principles are things that we should adopt in something else in our field, is we're always adopting new skills, new ways, because the key isn't how much do I know as the community mediator. The key is, what is the best way for Dr. D to feel most comfortable, most vulnerable, so she can be in her truth? And so what's the best way in this community? And it may be very formal, because that's what people feel comfortable with. It may be extraordinarily informal, because that's what people are comfortable with. Knowing how you have to hold that space is the best way to have people be able to make the choices and move forward.
Yeah. One thing I will share with you, DG, is that I really loved how you amplified, moving the talking stick across the heart, because now you're taking the warmth and the compassion from your own, sense of being, the vulnerability, and passing it on to the other one to help them open up too. And so it's rich in so many ways as far as modeling, inviting, inclusion, and that really, I'd like to use the words that the Dalai Lama gives to compassion. I did a lot of research about the neuroscience of compassion a few years ago. Just talked about this recently in another chat that I had. But oftentimes I think people look at compassion as, really identifying with the suffering of somebody. That sort of provokes images for me. Is like, I can see it, but that doesn't mean I want to go there. And I think of Mother Teresa, for example, is like, well, it's great work, but I don't want to, that's not the way I want to live my life, But so I went on, and the Dalai Lama refers to compassion as really nothing more than warm-hearted. So the converse of that is, do you want to show cold-hearted? And so it's like, well, no, I want to be warm-hearted. Okay, so how do you show that? What's the evidence of what you think and feel into what you do? And I'll draw on the quote from Ian Percy I use a lot in my trainings, is that we often judge others by their behaviors. 50% of how we communicate is through our behaviors, what people see. But we oftentimes justify our own behavior based on our intent. And that's where oftentimes when we get reactive to one another, as we see so prevalent in today's world, we don't look at where's the person coming from. And your example that you built off of my little story is evidence of that, is that I don't agree with that, but I see where you're coming from. I can see your intent there. And so it's something to think about, is that we justify our own behavior based on our intent, but we judge others by their behavior and then act reactively. We
don't take the time and create the space to hear that intent.
Right.
And to embrace that intent. And I think what we lose in that, and it's part of our theory of action, is the imbuto, I am because we are, and we are because I am. And seeing how we influence each other, both individuals as a group, is reality.
Yeah.
And no matter how much we try to wall that off or pretend that's not true, if we would just embrace that it is, think how much better we would be when all of us see I am because we are, and we are because I am. And a part of that process for us is at the heart. Community mediation is about community mobilization. To build on what you said, Dr. D, to mobilize everyone to have a warm heart, to care about themselves and to care about everyone else that are sharing this space with them. Because there is enough, and I do think, I was on a conversation yesterday, that when you come from a place of abundance, peace, justice, cohesion, connectedness are all non-threatening words.
Yeah.
When you come from a place of scarcity, they all are. Because if things are just for you, then maybe they're unjust for me. If you're in a peaceful place, maybe that means I'm in an unpeaceful place. If you're feeling really connected, you're in, maybe that means I'm excluded and out. And so part of our mobilization is have people embrace the abundance that is right there amongst us. We need to breathe, and we need to allow ourselves to experience it and not look at that and say, but I'm missing this. Yeah. Instead, embrace what is there and keep moving forward. In that place of abundance, all those things I mentioned will come because they're not threatening.
Yes.
And that's really needs to be changed. Back to what we said at the beginning. There is that fourth choice. It isn't just flee. It isn't just fright. It isn't just freeze. That all comes from a place of scarcity. It really is that fifth choice of to choose to be free, because that comes from a place of abundance.
Yes. And so there are two things as we begin to wrap up. One, based on what we've just talked about, some of the things that you described is really taking personal accountability for how I show up. because we are because of how I am, and that influences
right.
the dynamics of a relationship and vice versa. So it starts with me. It starts with you. It starts with each and every individual listening to us today. Yeah. Now, going back, you talked about some shoes as part of it. The issue was not the shoes. And I think that would be a great example to wrap up on today.
Looking at the shoes, it had to do with these two women who live in this neighborhood, and they call the police because they're yelling at each other and things going on. And then this woman took the other woman's shoes. And so that was the final straw for her. She wanted her arrested. You're a thief. You came on. And then when we came out, when the community mediators came out and they talked to the two women and figured out what was going on and they heard each other, the woman who was upset about the shoes realized the other woman didn't have any shoes, that she didn't have shoes she needed to wear. And so the other lady said to her, I wish I'd known that. You can have them. I have lots of shoes. Yeah. And so at the end of that moment, not only were they satisfied with the result, the woman who gave the shoes ended up caring more deeply for the other neighbor. She didn't realize the financial struggle the other neighbor was going through. She didn't realize that the neighbor needed a nice pair of shoes for an opportunity that was coming up, and saw this lady's nice pair of shoes just there on the porch and said, if I take them, I'll have something better. And so what we ended up having are two women who now care about each other because they know their stories than previously what occurred. So what I'd like to say with the shoes, if I can build on that, is that we never know what's going on in someone's life. We truly can never be in their shoes because we aren't them. We aren't their past. We aren't their present. We need to take the time to hear about what it is like for them in the shoes they're in. Yeah. So we can then share that journey with them.
Lovely. Thank you so much, because that is really the epitome of what this is having conversations to learn about others' intentions and what's their underlying needs and underlying interests. What are they looking for that's missing in their lives right now?
Without calling it underlying interest, because it sounds so legal, but just saying, let's talk about what's going on. Right?
Yeah.
And having that, and that's what your community mediator gives you the gift to do. Let's have that conversation and figure out what you said earlier, that we must have a conversation, not a confrontation. Yeah. Let's have that, Dr. D. And when we do that, we will see a difference in individual lives, in lives on that street corner, and lives in a larger community.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to ask you, DG, in terms of ending this wonderful conversation today, is that if people want to know more about community mediation, what resources can you suggest? And if they want to reach out, I don't know if you're available, but how might they get more information or be able to talk to someone?
Sure. There's a variety of different ways. Definitely go to nafcm.org, nafcm.org. You can download the State of Mediation Report. The James Foundation funded that back in 2018. It'll give you a sense of what is going on around the country, what people are doing that you may not have realized, wow, I could have benefited from that. And then if you want to know more, just write to admin, ADMIN, @nafcm.org, and we will respond to you. We'll respond to your question. It is our hub, and then we look at the question, and then we send it out to different folks on our team who are best able to answer it, as opposed to going to one person who will do the same thing. This way you just write there, and we'll be able to respond. We are grateful. I am grateful to you and this opportunity, and to your listeners. The more we can let people know what's available to them, then we are creating peace in a corner of the world you and I may never visit. Right. We are helping to facilitate justice in a corner of a world you and I may never visit. And more importantly, we're able to mobilize people to be connected and to be able to own and resolve their own conflicts, revolutionize that conflict, again, in parts of the world you and I may never have the blessing to go to, but we'll be able to make that difference. So thank you very much for that.
Well, you're very welcome. It's been a delight to have you here, and again, educational for me in the sense of learning more about what's happening in the world of community mediation. And how many community mediation initiatives or centers are there in the United States? And if people were interested in bringing this to their community, how might they do that? So just real quickly.
Thank you for that opening. We know of, and we estimate there's 400 community mediation centers in the United States and Canada. And we are actually receiving resources through the Trust Foundation right now to cultivate developing centers around the country. So if you don't have a center and you're thinking this would be perfect, then let us know. We have other funders we're talking to as well, that we can really begin to from the grassroots cultivate. So if one of your listeners, Dr. D, is out there going, I want that in my community, please reach out.
Yeah.
Please reach out, and we will help you take that idea and move it to a reality and a blessing for your community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so again, they can reach out to admin@nafcm.org.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much, DG. It's been so enlightening. Like you, I hope to spread the word of dispute resolution and community mediation as a tool for our community to heal and grow and live in abundance.
Amen. Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And so thank you again, everyone, for listening. Please pass this on if you enjoyed what you had to hear today. Subscribe, be alerted to our next upcoming show in just 2 more weeks. And again, another thought leader from the world of dispute resolution and navigating through conflict. It's okay. It's not a scary thing to avoid. We can get through it, and there are great ways to do that. Dr. D, the Mindset Doc, Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Well, at this point, I hope that you're much more enlightened and aware of what community mediation can do where you live, where you work, and where you play. And we're seeing more and more centers evolve in order to serve the needs of our communities. And so if you're interested, please reach out and let us know what your interest is. And DG's comments and how to reach him will be available in our recording. But I want to talk about our next guest coming up. We're continuing on this wonderful line of tremendous thought leaders with rich experience. And I'm so excited to have next in 2 weeks, George J Chenos. George comes to us with amazing background as well, having been a longtime litigator, and then he actually argued a case before the Supreme Court and won. So pretty fascinating. Not only that, he was actually Attorney General for the state of Nevada. So lots of experiences there in terms of decoding the conflict mindset, I guess. But we connected, and it was a delight to have him, to meet him, and so I had to have him back and be on my next episode. And so don't go away, because he's going to talk about surfing the technological tsunami that's about to come, is already on its way, rapidly developing, but then also how to learn how to dance with our machines as we move more into artificial intelligence. I know he doesn't stop there. This whole effort on his part, writing his book on the millennial samurai, was really about how to pass on to his 15-year-old daughter after some life-altering, changing events. He wanted to leave a message. He wanted to leave her some wisdom and guidance in case he wasn't around. So listen in. Tune in. Mark your calendars for 2 weeks from today, George Chenos. And The Millennial Samurai is not just a book, it's actually an evolution to empower people to make a change. So check it out in the meantime, and make sure you come back, subscribe, pass this on, share it with other people. And by being a subscriber, you'll always have access to the recordings. So see you in 2 weeks.